Hey Lighthouse, hope everyone is having a good summer so far. We've been back in person on Sunday mornings for a couple of weeks now. It's been great finally getting the chance to see a lot of y'all after more than a year away. Hopefully y'all have also been going to English worship on Sunday mornings or tuning in online, because we've been going through a new series called Reset, Rebirth, and Restore. Pastor Art has been emphasizing the fact that we all get the chance to reset some of the bad habits we picked up during quarantine, or we also get the chance to reset some of the bad habits we may have had before COVID. That the goal isn't to get back to normal so much as it is to make a new and a better normal. Now, the Friday series we've been going through at Lighthouse the past couple of weeks has a similar theme. Cycle Breakers is about looking at some of the habits we have in our lives, either before COVID or some of the things that we picked up during quarantine, and some of the patterns that we see in our families and in the world around us. Now, we're supposed to take a look at these habits or these patterns and really ask ourselves honestly, is there any sin that we need to break free from? Now, similarly, we also look to see if there are opportunities to improve our worship or to strengthen our relationship with God. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the story of King Josiah. So his story is found in 2 Kings, chapter 22 and 23. There's also a parallel passage in 2 Chronicles in chapters 34 and 35, which emphasizes different aspects of his time as king. And it's a long passage, so I won't read it all here on video, but be sure to take some time together later as a small group to go through it all. All right, so let's start in chapter 22. We see that Josiah became king at a really young age. Now, chapter 21 actually tells the story of his grandfather and his father, who were both kings that did evil in God's sight. Josiah's grandfather Manasseh was king for 55 years, and he rebuilt a lot of the idol worship and the altars throughout Israel. Josiah's father Amon then took the throne at 22 years old. But he only ruled for 2 years because the people assassinated him because he continued the idol worship. So this is how Josiah became king at only 8 years old. Let's look at some of the culture, though, that Josiah inherited. So the past two kings really perpetuated a cycle of idol worship and led the people of Israel astray. So there was also widespread corruption, and they also murdered just anyone who opposed them. They neglected God's laws, and they made God's people look no different than the surrounding nations. Josiah, though, he was different. The 2 Chronicles says that Josiah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and that he was 16 when he began to seek the God of David. From the previous two kings, the temple where people were supposed to worship was in ruins, and the scrolls that the law was written on had pretty much been forgotten. So Josiah sent some people to help repair the temple, and when they were there, they actually found the lost book of law, and they brought it back to the king. So the law, like I said, had basically been forgotten by the people by the time Josiah became king. So remember back when Israel first received the law from Moses. In Deuteronomy 6, it says, "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hand, bind them on your foreheads, write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates." The law of God was supposed to be something very present in their everyday lives, but instead it was left forgotten inside of a ruined temple. So after bringing the book back to Josiah, the secretary and the priest, they read the law to him. And when Josiah hears it, he immediately recognizes his sin in light of God's perfection, and he tears his clothes and goes into mourning. This had to be a really different reaction than the previous two kings would have given if they were confronted with their own sin. And in a lot of ways, the culture that Josiah was living in, it isn't that different from our world today. Where God's law doesn't really carry the same weight that it used to, or where there's idol worship everywhere, or people generally just, they do what they want. Eventually, we're confronted with the reality of our own sin, and we have a choice on how we can respond. Josiah gives us an example of how we can respond differently than the generations before us or the world around us. He sends some people to ask a prophet how God will deal with Israel's sin, and the news wasn't good. Now, he heard that God was going to bring disaster on this place and its people according to everything written in the book the king of Judah has read. God goes on to speak through the prophet and says, "Because they have forsaken me and burned incense to other gods and aroused my anger by all the idols their hands have made, my anger will burn against this palace and will not be quenched." Later in chapter 23, in response to the news he just heard, Josiah gathered all the people together and read the law to all of them. Then he made a covenant to God before all the people that he was going to walk after the Lord and keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul. And the people all joined in. This led to the people going and removing all the idols from the temple and burning them outside. They also removed all the priests who were the ones actually making sacrifices to the idols. Then they went throughout Jerusalem and burned all the idols that were set up at the city gates and all the altars that were set up for idol worship throughout the country. Josiah was born into a cycle of idol worship, but instead of following the example of those before him, he chose to follow God and not worship the same idols as everyone around him. Because Josiah was able to spend time reading the Word of God, he was convicted to follow God's law and made a tangible difference in restoring Israel's relationship with God after generations of idol worship. Josiah gives us a practical example of what a cycle breaker looks like and how we can follow his lead. It starts with recognition of our own sin and seeking to have a relationship with God through his word. Then it's looking to see what idols we have in our lives and what we're prone to worship outside of God, and then actually taking action and getting rid of them. So this is what we'll be talking about more in our small groups tonight. Take some time to read the passage together as a group, recap what happens, and then discuss what role the Bible plays in your lives now. Is it similar to the people in Josiah's time, where we've pretty much forgotten about it? Or is it more like Josiah, where we read it and we feel convicted? Next, we'll talk about what idol worship looked like for the people in Josiah's day and how that's similar or different from our lives today. And then finally, what we can be doing now to follow Josiah's example. So stay tuned for some announcements, and I hope everyone has a good and challenging discussion.
Your youth retreat is on and registration is live right now. Go tell your parents and register at acc.church/youth retreat. All the details can be found on the registration page. We will have COVID safety protocols in place, but we're most excited nonetheless to host youth retreat this year and to see how God will move. Everything you need to know can be found at acc.church/youth retreat. Make sure you stay connected with us online at acclighthouse.org and on Instagram at acclighthouse. If you want to watch any of our prior videos, you can click or tap the screen. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in our next video, and I can't wait to see everyone at Lighthouse this Sunday.